Okay, this video is going to be chapter 35C. It's from this book, The Medical Reformation by Peter Rogers. That's me. We're going to be talking about explaining what causes cancer. And you always want to understand what causes a disease because very often, most of the time, the treatment is to avoid the thing that causes it. And that's not just to prevent it, but that can often improve prognosis. Okay, so starting out with cancer, the typical thing taught in medical schools is the SMT, somatic mutation theory, that a toxic chemical or a virus causes a change in the DNA and then the cell mutates and becomes cancer. But I'm not buying it. I think that can be relevant, but that's not the money. And the reason I say that is the Cancer Genome Atlas project showed that doesn't hold up to closer scrutiny. In addition, when a cancer occurs, it's not just one mutation. It's a whole new way of life that the cell really changes. So basically, here's an anaerobic bacteria. And when the Earth started, the Earth had no oxygen available for the original single-cell bacteria living on Earth. Okay, then gradually oxygen became available and cells gradually developed the ability to metabolize oxygen, but it was often low or intermittent at times, and they had a revert pathway to go back to anaerobic metabolism. And it's thought that eukaryotic cells with a nucleus and with mitochondria, that some maintain the ability under some circumstances to revert back to anaerobic metabolism versus most of them die. Okay, and so this idea of an injury to the mitochondria and the cell reverting to anaerobic metabolism is called the Warburg effect. And that is a much better explanation of cancer. It's called the metabolic theory of cancer. So just remember that hypoxia, lack of oxygen, can cause a cell to revert to a primitive pathway of anaerobic metabolism, primarily anaerobic metabolism. So here's a normal human cell. It takes in glucose, is converted to pyruvate. That is then sent on to the mitochondria. In the center of the mitochondria, it runs a cycle called Krebs cycle, also called the tricarboxylic acid cycle or the citric acid cycle, and that generates more electron carriers. The electron carriers send their electrons to the inner mitochondrial membrane, this sort of lobulated, infolded membrane here on the inner part of the mitochondria. There's an outer mitochondrial membrane and an inner mitochondrial membrane. Okay, and then that runs an electron transport mechanism that produces tons of ATP. That's where most energy in the human body comes from. The normal human cell is a worker, and it does the job of whatever body part, organ it's in. If you're in a liver cell, you have to detoxify things. You have to build glycogen, break down glycogen, run gluconeogenesis, all these things to maintain blood glucose levels. Okay, you have to secrete the bile, etc. So you need tons of energy to work all day, working on the railroad. Okay. A cancer cell is not like that. A cancer is more like an anaerobic bacteria. It just wants to replicate and then go metastasize to another location. It's sort of like it's Johnny Paycheck says, take this job and shove it. I don't got enough energy to work as a liver cell. You don't give me, my mitochondria ain't working, so I'm just going to multiply and get the heck out of here, find a new place to live. All right, so some of the things that are different is the mitochondria primarily runs its glucose metabolism anaerobically. Okay, and this will generate protons, which is acidic, and it'll pump these protons into the extracellular matrix. And the relevance is it'll create an acidic pH around itself. That acidic pH helps it to outcompete the neighboring cells. A big thing a cancer does is it outcompetes the neighboring cells for growth. It tries to steal their resources and outcompete them. Okay, other things that are upregulated on cancer. CD36 receptors to bring more fat into the cancer cell. Because remember, the cancer cell, like a bacteria, it's replicating. It has to double itself. It has to double all its proteins, double all its DNA, double all its lipids, to make membranes. And once it has a full copy of itself, it can then split in half, and that's cell replication. Okay, it increases its plasma membrane ion receptors, transferrin receptors. And another thing that a lot of people aren't aware of is that glutamine can come in the back door and you can run Krebs cycle on that. And Krebs cycle can run in a reverse direction. And this is really important to know because this is why somebody recommending a high protein diet like paleo, keto, carnivore for cancer patients, in my opinion, is stupid. And that's also why I disagree with Seyfried. Seyfried's a real famous guy, Thomas Seyfried. He did great research and he's a great teacher about the metabolic theory of cancer, but he tends to recommend the keto diet for cancer, which I think is completely stupid. Okay, we'll talk about that more later, but I disagree with him about that. Okay, Warburg effect. So like I said, if you want to learn about the metabolic theory of cancer, he gives good lectures on that. He wrote a good book about that. And I do think the guy's legit. I think he's really trying to help people. But in my opinion, I think he needs to study his nutrition more. Okay, so the Warburg effect includes that you're going to have lactic acid also sent to the extracellular matrix, going to acidify that extracellular matrix, and that acidic milieu, tumor microenvironment, favors the cancer cell. Okay, you're also going to have increased receptors for insulin-like growth factor. And again, protein tends to increase insulin-like growth factor. I don't like it. What I would do, my approach, if I had cancer, is I would try to starve it to death. Basically use the Fabian strategy, which the Romans used to conquer Carthage, to defeat Hannibal. They couldn't beat Hannibal head to head, face to face. He was the greatest general of their time. But by using the Fabian strategy of starving his supply lines, they were able to defeat Hannibal and defeat Carthage. Okay. Okay, the iron receptors called transferrin receptors. Okay, acidifying the matrix. So, like I said, I would minimize my dietary fat, minimize my dietary protein, especially animal protein. I would avoid excessive dietary iron. A lot of foods are reinforced with it. A lot of foods intrinsically have a lot of it, like red meat. Meat iron is heme iron, so it's absorbed more than plant iron. So heme iron is absorbed at a much higher rate than is plant iron. That's an important point. That's another reason why you don't want to eat any animal product. Zero, none. Okay, and I don't buy this social thinking, I'm cutting down on meat or whatever and oil. No, think biblical. Thou shalt not eat meat. Thou shalt not eat oil. I would avoid things that tend to acidify the blood, like animal protein, because it's got amino acids, the key word being acid there. Okay, and I would avoid sodium chloride, because the chloride, the anions, they displace bicarbonate, which is a pH buffer, and they cause a low-grade metabolic acidosis. Okay, now we're going to get into more detail on the Warburg effect, and we're going to talk here about the Warburg effect in the lung. So when you accidentally inhale asbestos, let's say you're working with asbestos for insulation for some reason. Asbestos fiber gets into the lung. The body forms an immune response to it, wall off the foreign body. And when you have an initial immune response, you try to kill the invading thing and dispose of it. But if you can't completely get rid of it, you just wrap it in fibrosis. And that fibrotic tissue, scar tissue, will also envelop some normal cells. Most of those cells will die, but some of them will undergo a Warburg effect where they can revert to anaerobic metabolism and become cancer. So this is asbestos inhalation leading to the formation of cancer in the lung. And it'll often be on the pleural surface. That's called a mesothelioma. But do you see how this works? Inflammation leads to scarring called fibrosis. The scarring called fibrosis decreases the oxygen delivery to the tissues. You just make a cell farther away from the capillary and it gets less oxygen, and then you put a barrier up like fibrotic tissue and it gets still less oxygen, and you prevent blood vessels from going into it, still less oxygen, so that makes tissue hypoxic. Warburg shows he could get cells to become cancerous when he dropped their oxygen delivery by 35% or more. Okay, so that's a mechanism whereby asbestos in the lung can cause cancer. So at first glance you're like, yes, so what? I don't work with asbestos insulation. Okay, but guess what? People have scar tissue all over the place, okay? I'm going to show you some more examples of that. And you're going to see that this is a ubiquitous mechanism. Okay, let's say you have a person who has hepatitis virus, okay? And that will cause scarring, and then the scarring will cause some liver cells to be hypoxic, and those can develop cancer. Everybody knows about hepatitis B virus, hepatitis C virus, leading to fibrosis of the liver, which becomes cirrhosis of the liver, is just extensive fibrosis, and you get increased rate of cancers in there that'll often kill the patient. Well, guess what? When you have excessive fat in the liver, and the majority of Americans do, the majority of middle-aged Americans have fatty liver, the fatty liver will sometimes progress then to inflammation. So NAFL is non-alcohol fatty liver. When it becomes inflamed, non-alcohol steato means fat, hepatitis. So now you're going to have fibrosis, and that can progress all the way to full-blown cirrhosis. And this is now becoming a more and more common indication for liver transplant. Okay, but what I'm saying is the inflammation leading to scar tissue, collagen being laid down in the liver leads to cirrhosis. That'll cause tissues to become ischemic, and that will increase your risk of cancer. Okay, so now you've just seen two major important types of cancer. A form of lung cancer or pleural cancer, mesothelioma cancer, a form of liver cancer. Well, guess what? You get chronic gastroesophageal reflux from abdominal pressure syndrome, not eating enough fiber. Your upper stomach pops into your chest, you get a hiatal hernia, you get constant gastroesophageal reflux causing inflammation that leads to a change in the lining of the stomach esophagus called Barrett's esophagus, and that then will cause fibrosis, and that then will make tissue cells ischemic, and that can cause cancer. Okay, so there's esophageal cancer, a major important type of cancer. Okay, and I just gave a lecture recently where I gave my Western abdomen lectures, and I talked about pancreas getting the same phenomenon. You can get inflammation in the pancreas, chronic pancreatitis, and the inflammation in the pancreas. Also in the context, you can get it from fatty atrophy of the pancreas too, with type 2 diabetes. And there's different mechanisms of beta cell atrophy, but fatty atrophy of the pancreas, just like you got fatty liver, you can get fatty pancreas, and that can lead to inflammation, fibrosis, and pancreatic cancer. Okay, so now you're seeing this is more and more cancers. We got liver cancer, a form of lung cancer, esophageal cancer. This can happen in lots and lots of locations. It can happen in the colon, right? It can happen in other parts of the body. As people get older, their immune system atrophies, so they're less able to protect themselves from cancer. Simultaneously, their atherosclerosis is worsening. More and more tissues are ischemic, having a lack of blood supply due to atherosclerosis, plugging up their arteries, okay, from high-fat diets and high-sodium diets. So you see where this is all going. More and more cancer can easily be explained and be caused by this. There's other mechanisms of cancer causation, but that's important. You can have cancer forms that are due to hormonal stimulation. Excessive estrogen stimulation increases your risk of breast cancer because it causes proliferation of breast ductal cells. It causes increased risk of uterine cancer, endometrial cancer, because it causes proliferation of endometrial lining. Guess what? The male prostate's kind of like the female uterus embryologically, such that it is sensitive to estrogen, and these estrogenic chemicals will increase the risk of prostate cancer. Okay, so there's a hormonally induced cancer. Okay, and then toxins can also contribute to all this. F- in your water increases your risk of cancer. You can see where this is going. All right, so what I would say is look at the good news here. Don't work with asbestos. All right, avoid alcohol and avoid high-fat diets, and you could prevent. You can most likely, almost certainly, prevent fatty liver and not go down this path and avoid these cancers. Eat your fiber so you don't get abdominal pressure syndrome, hiatal hernia, gastroesophageal reflux, and increase your risk of esophageal cancer. So you see how when you understand the metabolic theory of cancer, it tells you how you can avoid most of these cancers. And in plant-based communities, the incidence of these cancers is very low. Okay. Now, the somatic mutation theory, the problem with it is the data doesn't support it. As a matter of fact, I think that was good, what we covered today so far. And so what I'll do is we'll call it a day right now. And so the big teaching point of today was ischemia, lack of oxygen in a tissue, causes the mitochondrial dysfunction. Because they need oxygen. It's the ultimate electron acceptor and electron transport. And when you don't have oxygen in adequate availability, the mitochondria can't function and the cell can't run aerobic, oxygen-based metabolism. It can revert. It'll either die or revert to anaerobic metabolism. The anaerobic cells take up 100 times more glucose. That's why they're positive on the PET scan. So anyways, this was the fundamental issue about the metabolic theory of cancer as developed by Otto Warburg, the German biochemist who won the Nobel Prize in 1931. So now you know what to do. Avoid the things that cause tissue hypoxia, the things that cause atherosclerosis. And we'll later on talk about other mechanisms of cancer causation that all contribute to this. And by avoiding them all, you decrease your risk. Okay, I hope that's helpful.